Dear YouTube, in case you are investigating this video due to a complaint about hate speech or copyright violation, allow me to give the following assurances. Firstly, a word on copyright. If the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania is unhappy because I've used their propaganda in a way they disapprove of, please know that I am very familiar with copyright law and have ensured that any use of copyrighted material in this video falls within the fair use provisions, particularly as pertain to criticism and parody. Secondly, let me ease any concerns you may have about hate speech. Though I am unapologetically a critic of the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses, I feel no hatred whatsoever when it comes to individual believers. I have even spoken out on occasion against the harassment and mistreatment of witnesses. Rather than being hateful, this video, and indeed my channel, represents my attempt at respectfully offering a helpful resource for witnesses who are beginning to think of their faith as false or harmful and would like to know the other side of the argument. Hello and welcome to my rebuttal of the November 2017 JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted by Governing Body member David Splane and Governing Body helper Jim Mantz. Now, there's a lot to get through with this video, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Greetings. We're so happy you could join us for this broadcast. And I'm very happy because my co-host this month is a good friend of mine and a fellow worker, Brother Jim Mantz. Now, Jim and I work together in the writing department, and Jim helps the writing department, Jim and his team, they help the writing department to keep track of all the projects that we have to work on. And do you have any idea how many that is? 241 at any given time. And Jim does a lot of other things as well. Well, Jim, we've got another project on hand this month, and that's to get this broadcast underway.
So aside from just the obvious cheesiness and fakery that you always get when you have these collaborations between governing body members and governing body helpers, where they're basically pretending to be close chums on camera, aside from all that, I just found it interesting that David Splane was boasting about the number of writing projects that Jim is currently dealing with, or that the writing department is currently dealing with. Because however big that number is, it won't be as big as it was 10 years ago, or even longer back than that. Because the simple truth is that less material is being produced and less material is being printed. Now, we've had the cutbacks with the magazines over the years, and if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, you'll know exactly what I mean. If you look at your bound volumes and you see that they've been decreasing down through the years, especially since 2005, which was the last year that we had the full complement of Watchtower magazine articles. What you often hear witness apologists say when you point this out is they say, oh, well, it just makes sense to stop printing things. Printing's expensive these days and we can put all the information online. Well, you're not putting all the information online if you're not even writing the article for release as a PDF. And that's what I find most fascinating about the downsizing of Watchtower and the scaling back of its operations, is that it's not like they're even saying, well, we're going to produce the same quantity of spiritual food, we're just going to make it only available as a PDF. They're not doing that. They're saying, actually, we're not even going to write the stuff. We are dramatically reducing, I forget the exact percentage, but it's something like half. They've something like halved the amount of spiritual food over the past few years. And this is supposed to be the brink of Armageddon. You would think if there is ever a time in the world's history when you need spiritual food, it's the time we're living in now. and not back in 2005 or earlier.
This month, I'd like to talk about the efforts Jehovah's organization is making to produce literature, publications, articles that are as accurate as possible. We're going to talk about accuracy of statement.
Fantastic. Now, if only the governing body was always this interested in whether things are accurate or not, whether things are truthful or not, whether things can be verified or not. Honestly, I really struggled watching this episode, as I'm sure many of you did who've already seen it. I just struggled with the massive elephant in the room that's there throughout this episode, which is that more or less, basically none of the theological claims that Watchtower makes as regards itself and as regards its relationship with God, its mandate to serve as a channel of communication between God and mankind, none of these things are verifiable, none of these things can be substantiated. Therefore, if we're going to talk about accuracy, surely that's where our priority needs to be. But what David Splane's going to try to do in this episode is reassure witnesses that they can have total confidence in their publications, because everything's been researched, everything's been fact-checked, and everything that's written, everything that's printed in Watchtower literature is absolutely 100% the truth.
Now, suppose that a writer wants to quote something from a book. In the reference material, he'll supply a photocopy of the quote in the book, but very often he'll give us 2 or 3 pages before the quote and 2 or 3 pages after as well. And that way, our researchers can examine the quote in context to make sure that what we're saying in print is really what the author of the quote had in mind. For example, an evolutionist might make a statement which, on the surface, appears to confirm his support of creation. Or perhaps an atheist will make a statement that seems to indicate that he believes in God. But when you examine the quote in context, you realize that that isn't what the author had in mind at all. We would never deliberately distort a quotation. We try very hard to use all of our quotations in context.
So this part of the broadcast was just absolutely astonishing. Well, there were lots of astonishing parts, quite frankly, that we're going to come to. What David Splane just said basically described exactly what Watchtower did with the January 2015 Awake magazine article, which was titled or carried the theme, "How Did Life Begin?" Now, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, there was a big fuss made about this at the time. It's very easy to find all of the material that was written, but basically this was brought to the attention of the Friendly Atheist blog. They produced an article, Jehovah's Witness publication cites professor who doubts evolution, but professor says he was unfairly misquoted. Now, we covered the same story on JW Survey. It was frankly astonishing. What happened was Watchtower printed this Awake magazine, How Did Life Begin? And in the, the third paragraph, so the third paragraph in the feature article, well, I'll read you in context. That from the beginning it says, some might assume that a scientifically minded person would pick evolution and that a religious person would pick creation, but not always. So the reader is then set up in such a way as to say, well, we're now going to give you an example of a scientifically minded person who doesn't pick evolution and does pick creation. So that's the context that we're working with. And it then says, Rama Singh, professor of biology at Canada's Macmaster University, says, the opposition to evolution goes beyond religious fundamentalism and includes a great many people from educated sections of the population. So just taken on its own there, you're looking at that and you're thinking, oh, well, wow, here you've got a professor of biology at some university who is coming out as someone who's saying, well, evolution's not such a big deal. Actually, lots of educated people don't believe in it. Now, when this article was brought to Ramasingh's attention, he wrote a scathing open letter to the editor of Awake. He said, contrary to what you imply, I do not support a creationist view, nor do I suggest that even a minority of scientists support such a view. Anyone who reads my article can see that I fully support the theory of evolution. And then further on in his letter, your misquotation amounts to intellectual dishonesty and reflects on your character and dignity as editor, as well as a man of God. Now, what Watchtower did in response to this is they basically pretended it never happened. They took his quote out of the Awake. So if you have a hard copy of that 2015 Awake magazine, it should be in there. But if you go to the bound volume, it shouldn't be in there. And if you go and try and find it online and hunt down the PDF, you will notice that it's not there. So exactly what David Splane is describing is what Watchtower did in this situation. And as I'm going to explain later, there are countless instances of where Watchtower has done this, especially when it comes to its material against evolution, where it's plucked a quote from a scientist who supports evolution and accepts evolution, and they've just taken a line of text that could be construed as meaning that he's questioning it. They've done it routinely throughout history, as I'm going to come to later. So it simply astonishes me that Splane can try and convince the audience that they're not doing this when the evidence is just there.
Now, it's important to keep up with the very latest research. Something that was stated years ago as a fact may have been disproved. And the reason why is obvious. Someone may spend his entire life researching a very limited point in history, a very small point in history. And of course, if he spends so much time researching, he's going to uncover things. And so it's not surprising that from time to time we have to adjust our view of some historical points. We have to check, check, check. And later on in this discussion, we're going to consider some examples of it. It'll be fun. You'll love it.
This, again, was fascinating because what Splane's saying here is, well, hey, we're not experts when it comes to history. We have to rely on historians and archaeologists who devote their entire lives to studying history and to finding out exactly what happened and when it happened and how it happened. And we will happily defer to their expertise and their experience and their educational background when it comes to dealing with academic matters. Well, that's, again, not what Watchtower does, especially when it comes to 607 BCE. And again, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I would point you in the direction of a video I've already made about 607 BCE and 1914, why these dates are important to Jehovah's Witnesses, in which I basically break the news. Well, I'm not breaking the news, everyone knows this. I break the news that Jehovah's Witnesses are the only group of people who think that the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 607 BCE. They're the only ones who think that. In truth, the event, the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, can be reliably dated to 587 or 586 BCE. And the reason we can be so sure is because it turns out that period in history, the Neo-Babylonian period in history, is one of the most well-documented periods in ancient history, because the Babylonians were nerds when it came to writing about stuff. Even the most trivial thing that you could imagine. Oh, on this day, in this year of this Babylonian king's reign, I sold this man 3 sacks for this amount of money. And they were writing about these things. And what you have as a result of this, as a result of all of these people keeping all of these records, is this treasure trove of cuneiform documents, clay documents, that provide an unbroken timeline of the Neo-Babylonian history, so that you know exactly how long each king ruled, how long they ruled for, when they were replaced, and who succeeded them. And if you're going to pick any date, any period in history, to just pluck a date out of thin air and say, I think that this happened on this date, that's one of the most problematic parts of history to do that, because we just know too much about it. And we've been able to verify these documents and pinpoint the years that they refer to, because the Babylonians were also fastidious when it came to observing the stars and documenting at what position the stars were in. So as a result of that, we're able to, again, verify exactly what year they're talking about. And again, the evidence overwhelmingly points at the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians happening in 586, 587 BCE. It's just, that's when it happened. But Watchtower comes along and says that actually historians are wrong, archaeologists are wrong, all of these cuneiform tablets are wrong. If they say otherwise, then it's all some huge conspiracy. Because we know, or we've worked out, that Jerusalem was destroyed in 607 BCE. So how David Splane can sit there and say that Jehovah's Witnesses defer to the expertise of scholars and of professionals is completely beyond me, because that is the exact opposite of what they do when it comes to 607 BCE.
Now, someone might ask, why is it necessary to be so picky, to be so fussy about accuracy?
David, nobody is asking that question. Everyone in your audience is expecting an organization with Watchtower's resources to get their facts straight when it comes to writing.
And an answer I like to give an experience that I heard about a few years ago. In Northern Europe, there was a man who accepted a Bible study from Jehovah's Witnesses. And when he was asked what motivated him to want to study, he said, I read an article in your Awake magazine on trees. Now, I happen to be a bit of an expert on trees. And after I read the article, I said to myself, that article was so well documented. It was so precise. Any organization that is that careful when writing about trees is going to be just as careful when teaching me the Bible. And on that basis, he accepted a Bible study.
He sounds like just the sort of person witnesses love to meet. Someone who presupposes that just because one thing is factual or makes sense, everything else will too. If a religious group gives X statement that turns out to be accurate, then Y and Z statement must also be accurate, no matter how outlandish or nonsensical they may sound. Lucky for Jehovah's Witnesses that they got there first. Otherwise, he could have read something in a Scientology or Mormon publication about trees that happened to be accurate, and his beliefs would now be very different.
Care is also taken when quoting personalities of the past. Now, suppose we want to quote something that Napoleon Bonaparte said, the French general. Well, being French, Napoleon spoke French. So if we're quoting it in English, that means that somebody translated the quote from French into English. But Did he translate the quote correctly? Our researchers will probably go to the target language and research the quote in French or in another language. And more often than not, they find that what is presented in English doesn't accurately represent what the individual said at all.
This part also made me chuckle because it's this, conundrum of what to do when someone says something in a certain language and then you need to translate it. And of course, no two translators are necessarily the same. So translator A may translate something slightly differently to translator B, and it's kind of an art, really, to decide exactly what wording to use to reflect what was originally said, because some languages have just completely different words that are not easy to just replicate in another language. You need to kind of really think about how to convey the meaning of the words that were used in the original language. And this just made me think, well, what about the Bible? Is that not the problem that you have with the Bible, where you have 66 books written by lots of different people over a period of time in ancient languages, and these texts were copied and then copied again and then copied some more and then translated into another language and then translated into another language? Is that not the exact same problem that you have in that, when it comes to establishing the authenticity of the Bible and whether a particular verse was worded one way or whether there was some kind of nuance that has escaped us, that has escaped our 21st century minds? And of course, when it comes to those sorts of issues, not just Watchtower, but believers in general tend to say, God was guiding this process, and it was in God's interests to make sure that we have everything perfectly as it was intended. If that satisfies you, if that thinking satisfies you, then don't let me get in the way. But for me personally, I look at the Bible, and the more I learn about it, the more I read about it, the more I read about when the books were written and who likely wrote them. And for example, the fact that we know more about who wrote the books of the Old Testament than we know about who wrote the books of the New Testament, which sounds crazy, but that's actually the case. And the fact that the books of the Old Testament we can now reliably say that they were written much later than was previously thought. These are issues that you need to grapple with the more you research the Bible as a book and see what, again, experts have to say. Once you are able to defer to the experts and people who devote their lives to studying these things, there are some difficult questions that you end up needing to answer.
Our translators also go to great lengths to present accurate information to the brothers and sisters. Some time ago, the Awake magazine published an article on a very rare species of butterfly. Now, with all animals and insects, we provide our translators with the Latin name of the animal or the insect. And so our translators had the Latin name, but in one large country, they were unable to find the name in the vernacular. So what did they do? They phoned the country's leading university, and they were transferred to the biology department. And there, an expert gave them the name in the vernacular of that particular butterfly. But then he said, "Why is it that you're worrying so much about the correct name of this butterfly? If you got it wrong, there are only 2 of us in the whole country who would know the difference." Well, that opened the way to give a witness to this expert.
I found this part fascinating because the message here is that and when it comes to translating our publications, Watchtower's translation teams do a fantastic job, and they go to extreme lengths to make sure that the precise meaning is carried across, or if needs be, they'll do the research. Again, to some extremes in some cases. They'll do the research and they'll do the legwork to make sure that everything is accurately translated. Well, that's not been my experience when it comes to Watchtower publications. And I'll give you two reasons why. Firstly, as many of you will know, I live in Croatia, and in fact it was moving to Croatia that was basically the catalyst for me waking up from my beliefs as a witness. It was once I was unplugged from my indoctrination that I started to kind of really ask questions as to whether this was what I really believed. And it basically took only a few months for me to wake up from my beliefs, but there was obviously a crossover period where I was still going to meetings, and for a few months I was going to meetings as someone who still believed, and then gradually I stopped believing, but then I was still going to meetings as someone who didn't believe or only partially believed. So what I'm saying is, it wasn't like I just woke up one day and stopped believing and stopped going to meetings. And so while I was going to the meetings, especially the Watchtower study, I decided to make a concerted effort to try and learn as much Croatian as I could. And to this day, I mean, I'm happy to hold my hands up and say that was a total failure. My Croatian is not good. I speak like a bare minimum kind of survival level of Croatian. But the point is that at one point I was trying to learn Croatian, and I thought a good way of doing that would be to do a careful comparison between the English Watchtower and the Croatian Watchtower. So I would literally, sentence by sentence, try and see how they'd translated the Watchtower. And I'll never forget, for one of the articles, there was an entire sentence in the paragraph that had not been translated. They basically skipped it. So I'm there thinking, well, what do I do about this? As an English speaker with the English magazine, I know this kind of tiny, tiny fraction of spiritual food that the rest of the congregation doesn't know. And granted, it wasn't some hugely profound thing, but it was still a point from the English that wasn't carried over to the Croatian. I forget what it was now. I would have to really dig to find out exactly what it was. But you'll just have to trust me that they missed an entire sentence. And when I took this up with a friend of ours who we knew, who worked on the translation team in Zagreb, Bethel, he got quite defensive about it, and he was like, "Well, not everything needs to be translated, and we have freedom to decide how what the brothers can understand and blah blah blah." Anyway, he completely fobbed me off on the issue. But I've never forgotten that they actually missed an entire sentence. They didn't even try to carry the meaning through to the Croatian magazine. That's the first example I'm going to give you. The second example is actually from the February 15th, 2012 Watchtower. Many of you will remember a quite astonishing paragraph that appeared. It was actually to do with domestic violence. And it gave this story of a woman named Selma. And the gist of the story was that by becoming a better Christian wife, by taking her beliefs more seriously, she had managed to win her husband over without a word, which is an atrocious kind of myth that gets continually propagated in Watchtower literature, which essentially amounts to victim blaming. It amounts to saying that if you're being beaten as a wife, it's down to you to be a better Christian wife and to live by Bible standards, and if you were to do that, then you wouldn't be hit. It's absolutely appalling. And this was the essence of what appeared in this particular article. But what's interesting is that when you do a comparison, a sideways comparison between the English the Spanish and the German, you see that they've actually changed it in the other languages so that Steve doesn't actually hit Selma. So obviously my Spanish, I'm not going to even try to pronounce the Spanish. By the way, I need to thank my good friend Arthur Weber for producing this graphic for all of you so that you can see clearly, because he's better with languages than I am. But in the Spanish, the meaning is he had become furious with me. So no mention of anyone hitting anyone. In the German, the basic meaning is that he became extremely angry. And what's interesting is, I mean, you could be thinking, well, maybe there isn't a word for hitting someone in Spanish or German, but Arthur provides here examples of how you could actually convey the idea, if you wanted to, of Steve hitting Selma. So again, this whole idea of the Watchtower's translation department or translators doing this sterling job and being fastidious when it comes to details and accuracy and getting everything absolutely right, it's just demonstrably not true. And the simple truth is, if I'm going to boil everything down, the simple truth is that being a Jehovah's Witness is a different experience if you happen to speak English than if you happen to speak another language. Because even if you get the same publications translated, the translators will take liberties as they have in this situation. And that's if you're lucky enough to get the publication translated at all, because here in Croatia, there are many publications that still haven't been translated and frankly will never be translated. So the Proclaimer's book, that's not been translated in Croatian. The Insight volumes, to my knowledge, they're not translated. So again, it's a different experience depending on which language you speak. You have different access to spiritual food. So Croatians won't know anything about Beth Sarim unless they have the really old publications in Yugoslavian. But they won't know about Beth Sarim because they don't have the Proclaimer's book. And Beth Sarim is missed out of the more recent book, God's Kingdom Rules. So that's what I have to say about translation.
We're going to put a number of statements on the screen, and there's a problem with each one of them. Now, your job is to figure out what's wrong, why it is wrong, and then suggest how to fix it. It's going to be fun. Here's the first statement. According to the Smithsonian Knowledge Encyclopedia, the Egyptian Sphinx was constructed around 2550 BCE. The Egyptian Sphinx was constructed around 2550 BCE. Well, the problem is with the date, 2550. The global flood occurred about 200 years after that date. So what are the chances that the Sphinx survived the flood? Unless, of course, you think that that's how the Sphinx lost his nose. Now, these dates are good for you school children to keep in mind when you're writing reports. Sometimes you copy something from an encyclopedia and it gives a certain date, but think about the date of the flood, 2370, so that what you put in your report is as accurate as possible.
So, if you're like me, you were just flabbergasted by what we've just seen. I really hope that, by the way, the witnesses watching this will be like, that just sounds wrong. That I can't put my finger on it, but that doesn't seem like a good way of doing history. So what David Splane has just been saying is that if Watchtower gives you a date of when something happened in history that contradicts the dates that are given by scholars, by archaeology, by historians, by our accumulation of knowledge about ancient world history, then guess who gets the final say in when it comes to reconciling these things? Well, it's Watchtower. Watchtower gets the final say. So because Watchtower insists in its publications that in 2370 the entire planet was inundated with floodwaters, including what is now Mount Everest. Everything was covered in water, which, by the way, I mean, I'm not going to go into, it would be its own video to go through all of the problems scientifically with the flood. But one of those many, many problems is that there is nowhere near enough water on the planet to flood the earth. There just isn't. I mean, don't take my word for it. Go on some of the websites that give you projections for what happens if all of the global ice melts, because that's obviously a pressing issue nowadays with global warming. Just have a look at what the planet looks like if all of the ice melts. I've done this on previous videos, I know, but it's still there. The land masses are still there. We lose virtually all our coastal cities. It would be mayhem. It would rewrite the map, as it were, but there would still be land if all of the ice were to melt. There simply isn't enough water on the planet to inundate everything. But anyway, returning to this point about ancient Egypt, what Splane is saying is, again, that, historians are wrong. Actually, the flood happened in 2370, so there's no way in the world that the Sphinx could have been built before 2370, unless that's, he jokingly says, unless that's how the Sphinx lost its nose. I mean, need I say anything? I'm just, that's kind of like a I rest my case moment where you just say, well, look at how intellectually bankrupt this person is. He's already told us that Watchtower will defer to the knowledge and experience and expertise of people who devote their entire lives to studying a particular field. He's already said that they'll do that, but in this particular case, they won't. In this particular case, no, sorry, the flood happened in 2370, so there couldn't have been a Sphinx before that date. As I think I showed a video in one of my rebuttals of clothing. We have clothing from ancient Egypt that is older than when the flood is supposed to have happened. They've dated it and it's older. So for Splane to say, well, never mind clothing, the Sphinx couldn't have been built before this date. It's just one of those point and laugh moments. And again, I can only hope that witnesses watching this who aren't completely dishonest when it comes to the way they process facts, I can only hope that people will see straight through this.
Here's one. In 325 CE, the Roman Emperor Constantine established Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. Well, 325 CE, that looks right. And Constantine, that looks right. But look at the word official religion. Constantine never established Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. In 313, he did make it legal to be a Christian, but paganism was still one of the official religions. Apostate Christianity didn't become the official religion until 391 CE.
He makes this point about Christianity, or as he puts it, apostate Christianity, not becoming an official religion, the official religion of the Roman Empire until 391 AD or CE, depending on how you want to describe it. But what's interesting is that, and this is actually something that we're going to return to, the fact that we're dealing with two sets of standards, apparently. We're dealing with the standards that they historically had in Watchtower literature and the standards that they claim to have today. So to put it in a nutshell, we're being told that the standards are now so high that we can kind of look at things with a little bit more scrutiny. And what's interesting is that if you go back in previous publications, you will find that they contradict what David Splane has just said. And I need to thank John Redwood, my colleague at JW Survey, for doing some digging on this. He's found some quotes from, first of all, a 1985 Watchtower. It's actually the August 1st, 1985 Watchtower on page 5, where it says, "Many chose to disregard this divine counsel, so much so that in the 4th century a wolf in sheep's clothing, the Emperor Constantine, was able to compromise corrupt Christianity further by making it the official religion of the Roman Empire." So just to clarify, according to what Splane's now saying, he's saying that apostate Christianity didn't become the official religion until 391, but in this 1985 quote, it says that Constantine, who was before Theodosius, he did make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And similarly, there's another quote from a 1961 Watchtower. It's actually the February the 15th Watchtower on page 103, paragraph 7, where it says, "What then of the Catholic system? Catholicism boasts of its greater age. However, history shows that the Roman Catholic sect in fact dates back no farther than the year AD 312, when Emperor Constantine established it as the official religion of the Roman Empire, with himself as the Pontifex Maximus, or first Pope." So, long story short, Splane is contradicting Watchtower literature, to put it simply. And if Watchtower now has these elevated standards where it will no longer recognize statements such as we've just read of when Christianity became the official religion, and it insists on 391 as being the year that Christianity or apostate Christianity became the official religion, what do we do about previous years when spiritual food from Jehovah gave us a different date, gave us a different year? What can we say then about the accuracy of writers back then, and what implications does that have for the quality of spiritual food that was being given to Jehovah's Witnesses in decades gone by?
Here's one. We can have confidence in the Bible. It is mankind's oldest book. Mankind's oldest book. Years ago, some scholars believed that texts written by Adam, Noah, and others survived the flood and became part of the Bible. And if that were true, then we could say that the Bible is mankind's oldest book. Now here's a quote from Insight on the Scriptures, our Bible encyclopedia. It says, "There is no way to establish definitely that some of the histories mentioned in the book of Genesis were committed to writing before the flood." So today we might call the Bible one of mankind's oldest books, or the world's oldest modern book, as we do in one of our videos.
So here again, I'm afraid David Splane is skating on thin ice when it comes to comparing what Watchtower publications have said in the way they've worded things, because he's saying that it's inaccurate to say that the Bible is mankind's oldest book. Well, let's see what older publications have to say on that. And again, I have to thank John Redwood, who has been doing some digging on this. So the Awake 1988, July 8th, says, "Yet there is a source of information that tells us exactly what the soul is. That source is the Bible, the oldest book known to man." And then in the same year, the 1988 Watchtower, April 15th, said, in answer, let us look at what the oldest book in existence, the Bible, has to say on this matter. And going a little bit further back, Watchtower of 1985, January 15th, the Bible is by far the most widely circulated book in all history. It is the most translated, the most quoted, and the oldest book. And the same year, 1985 Awake, advice abounds from many sources, but the best source of advice is the oldest book in existence, the Bible. Now, there are actually more quotes that John has provided, but I won't bore you. Suffice to say, they go on to say exactly what Splane has said they shouldn't say by saying that the Bible is mankind's oldest book. So again, we have, quite frankly, a disingenuous approach being taken here, which is to suggest that Watchtower would never write something that's inaccurate, and they would never make a statement without verifying it first. But when you go back in Watchtower literature, you see that they have been making exactly the statements that Splane is saying they shouldn't be making, which again begs the question, well, if they can get it wrong about that, then what other things can they get it wrong about, especially when they are hinging conclusions or ascribing divine significance to certain facts that they're writing about.
This is to illustrate the fact that times change. Research facilities improve. A scholar does exhaustive research on one point of history, and he uncovers things that were previously unknown. So we have to keep up. We have to check, check, check. And when credible research reveals that we have to adjust or tweak a statement that we made in the past, we do so without hesitation. Our goal is to provide information that is as accurate as possible, because we know that you brothers and sisters use this information. You quote it in the field ministry. You use it in your public talks. And so we want to make sure that our brothers are fed with the most accurate spiritual food possible.
So it's worth recognizing at this point that David Splane essentially acknowledges that they have written stuff in the past that they won't be writing from now on, because they've learned more, because there is more knowledge in certain areas, and they're willing to defer to experts in certain fields, and as he puts it, move with the times, so that Watchtower literature is as up to date as possible. Well, if that's the case, again, why do we still have Watchtower publications saying that Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in 607 BCE, when there are no historians and no credible scholars who are saying that? It's just Jehovah's Witnesses who use that date, and the reason why they use it, of course, is because it's tied to 1914. Without 1914, you don't have 1919. Without 1919, you don't have Watchtower being made the faithful slave, and without Watchtower being made the faithful slave, you don't have the Jehovah's Witness religion. So that's the reason why they have this double standard in place, where they're willing to say something that contradicts something that they've said in the past, because they're willing to defer to experts. But in this one area, or in a number of areas, if we include things like evolution, if anything contradicts established Jehovah's Witness teachings, then it can just be ignored. And that is not an intellectually honest way to go about publishing information.
We're imperfect, of course, and we are going to make mistakes. And when we do, we have to correct them. Our goal is to do the best we can in all our imperfection.
First of all, David Splane, as I've repeatedly argued, you don't get to fall back on the excuse that you're imperfect when you are punishing with family estrangement those who question the accuracy of your teachings. Secondly, dealing with mistakes isn't just about correcting them, as you did with the Rama Singh quote in the January 2015 Awake article. It's about publicly acknowledging the mistake and apologising for it, which newspapers commonly do by printing a retraction. Watchtower's practice is to cover over the mistake and hope that nobody notices. A thoroughly dishonest and disingenuous practice for any publisher.
Well, how does it make you feel? I know how it makes me feel. I'm grateful that Jehovah's organization takes accuracy so seriously. It gives me confidence.
Well, again, David, it does and it doesn't. Jehovah's organization takes accuracy seriously if it's on a subject or if it's on a detail or a fact that doesn't have any bearing on Jehovah's Witness theology. If it's something that has no real relevance to the Bible or to Jehovah's Witness teachings, if it's something that doesn't really alter anything, if it's something that doesn't really budge one of the Jenga blocks in Watchtower's theology, then Watchtower will happily defer to the experts. But if an expert says something, or even if all experts say something that contradicts Watchtower theology, you guys just bury your heads in the sand and pretend it hasn't been said, or you insist that actually what you think is more accurate or more credible than what the experts say.
Now, let's give our attention to my good friend Jim. And I think Jim is ready to take us on a field trip so we can meet some of the researchers at Bethel.
Thank you, David. And yes, our researchers take very seriously their task of maintaining a high standard of accuracy.
In today's media, much of what's presented as fact is often colored by emotion and personal opinion.
Of course, there's no emotion or personal opinion whatsoever in Watchtower propaganda. Just forget about the fact that in almost every episode, someone is filmed crying about their JW experience. Don't stop for a moment to consider that even if there were mountains of evidence disproving Watchtower dogma, this would not matter one iota to people like Splane and other Watchtower leaders who have invested decades of their lives teaching that the Jehovah's Witness religion is God's one and only true channel with mankind.
Jehovah's Witnesses, however, remain committed to defending God's Word, the Bible, as the standard for truth. As Jesus said at John 17:17, "Your word is truth." The wide-ranging subject matter contained in the publications of Jehovah's Witnesses is painstakingly researched by their writing research department. Their research methods are modeled after that of Bible historians, such as Luke and Jeremiah, reliance on reputable first-hand sources.
We're not looking just for someone's opinions or what someone believes about a topic.
If the material is socially or politically biased, for example, we can't rely on it. We look for objective material.
So here, apparently, we are told that Watchtower material isn't biased. It's objective. We're only interested in the facts. We're not going to let emotions or opinions get in the way of finding out what really happened. Well, I'm sorry, but you are saying this as a writer, as a cog in the machine of an organization that insists that in 1919 it was chosen to be a mouthpiece for the almighty creator of the universe, and that ever since that year it has been dispensing spiritual food so that those who read this spiritual food will avoid being annihilated at Armageddon. You cannot remotely claim that that is objectively true. That is an opinion, that is a belief, it is something that Jehovah's Witnesses are emotionally invested in, especially when they've spent years or decades believing it and pushing it in people's faces and orienting their lives around it and shunning family members who don't join them in believing it. It's a purely emotional thing. And we're going to have examples in this video of precisely where claims are made that are purely emotional, that are purely about opinion, and yet here Watchtower is saying that if a source appears to be giving an opinion or appears to be emotional or appears to be biased, they won't use it.
We cover everything from historical, scientific, geographical, flora, fauna, space.
So before the script is even written, we'll provide a research package, and we'll follow the project till final delivery to make sure that everything that is said, everything that is shown, is solidly based in fact, and it's well researched.
There's a lot more research than what the viewer or the reader will ever see.
And what we've just been shown is the Origin of Life brochure, which is an anti-evolution brochure, which again does precisely what I was talking about before. It misquotes scientists. It does exactly what David Splane was trying to assure the witness audience that Watchtower would never do, which is it cherry picks quotes and tries to make it look like scientists are saying something to refute evolution when that is not remotely what they're saying. And there is a history of this going right back through Watchtower publications. In fact, I'm going to show you here a table that's been produced on a web page. I'm actually going to refer to this web page again later. But this is just a table to show you some of the misquotes in the Creation book that was published back in the 1980s. And it turns out that when you actually look up these sources, and this is the thing, Watchtower shows us here this bundle of papers, and it says, oh, don't worry, we've done the legwork, we've done all the research, we've made sure that we can verify everything. But it turns out that when you actually go and look for the original book, which isn't always easy to do, I mean, sometimes we're dealing with doctoral theses or very obscure kind of scholarly books or manuals that they've found this quote from. And when you actually look at it and you read it in context, you find that, again, they're guilty of doing exactly what Splane assures us they would never do, which is they've done a misquote. They have tried to make it look like someone is saying something that they're just not remotely saying. So again, my mind boggles at how Watchtower can be this dishonest about how dishonest it's been. And they've been caught red-handed doing this. There are multiple examples, multiple publications that you can point to that contain misquotes. And here they're saying that they would never do it.
It seems very simple, the height of Mont Blanc. And with the height of Mont Blanc, we found out number one was 4,807 meters. Then we found another source, 4,810. Let's check a third one, 4,808. So what is now real? In that case, we had to consult the French National Institute of Geography and Forestry information.
So what we've just found out is that Watchtower is more interested, more honest when it comes to the height of Mont Blanc than it is with the date for the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Again, when it's something that doesn't affect their theology, when it's something that doesn't contradict their understanding of the Bible or the things that they've been teaching over many decades, they're happy to shift. They're happy to be flexible. They're happy to say, well, we really need to know exactly, what the figure is, what the year is, what the detail is. We want to make sure of everything. But when it comes to something that they are invested in, when it comes to a belief or teaching that they've hung their entire theology on, completely different standard applies.
Things that you think are true because they are commonly known may not actually be totally accurate.
Quotes need to be verified. We want to go to the first-hand source, the original source for that quote. That's one thing. And secondly, context matters. We want to quote things properly.
When Gandhi and Lord Irwin came together, Gandhi said, when your country and mine come together in the teachings of Christ and in the Sermon on the Mount, then we will have solved the problems of our countries and the world. So we researched it. No one could confirm that those two men ever met. So it's a great quote. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't refer to Jesus or even the Sermon on the Mount, but that particular one we couldn't use.
These are all of the publications from my collection. And bear in mind, there are more publications, but I just don't have them yet. But just from my collection, these are all the publications, including yearbooks, where the Gandhi quote can be found. So let's start in the 90s with the Knowledge Book. And on page 16, it says, this sermon, that's the Sermon on the Mount, so impressed the late Indian leader Mohandas K. Gandhi that he reportedly told a British official, when your country and mine shall get together on the teachings laid down by Christ in this Sermon on the Mount, we shall have solved the problems not only of our countries, but those of the whole world. In the 70s, you have this book, Good News to Make You Happy. They have the full quote there on page 30. I don't know whether you can see. There is this brochure from 1978. This is where the quote appears on page 23. The Look I Am Making All Things New brochure from 1986 even has Gandhi's picture on the page where the quote about the Sermon on the Mount appears. It also appears in the Inspired book, in the 1980 Awake. The famous Hindu leader Mahatma Gandhi once said to the British Viceroy of India, when your country and mine, blah, 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 blah. What fascinates me about this quote is it says, the famous Hindu leader Mahatma Gandhi. Bear in mind, it's quoting from a Hindu leader and it's saying he's famous. I think somewhere else it calls him great. But this is still someone who essentially, if Armageddon had come during his lifetime, he would have been slaughtered as wicked because he wasn't one of Jehovah's Witnesses. This is in a 1982 Watchtower where hopefully you can see the quote. The quote appears in a nice blue box in this 1984 Awake article. The quote appears here in this 1986 Watchtower. In the June 1st, 1959 Watchtower, you can find it here. And in a 1958 Watchtower, March 1st, it gets its own box again, A Hindu's Solution, and the famous words are, towards the end. Now, there are two things that I find most fascinating about this Gandhi business. The first thing is, as the point that's being made in this broadcasting episode, where Watchtower's saying, oh, well, we'd never dream of using this quote now because we can't verify that these words were ever said. Well, again, if why do you have different standards of accuracy now than you had in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, when you were repeatedly using this quote? And that brings me to my second point. Isn't it interesting that these words by someone from a different religion were used so extensively? And probably when you heard this part of the broadcast, if you're a Jehovah's Witness or a former Jehovah's Witness, you were immediately thinking, I'm sure they've said that in the publications. And it's because you've had this quote thrown at you over the decades, probably, in Watchtower literature. Why the over-reliance on one quote? Is Watchtower's writing department so thin on reference material? And in this particular episode, we're shown all of these library bookshelves and all of these encyclopedias and references, and yet here they keep returning to the same words, almost on a yearly basis, but certainly decade after decade. They keep returning to these words. Why? Because it suits their narrative. And that's what propaganda is all about. Not necessarily whether it's true, not necessarily whether it can be verified, but whether it fits with the narrative.
So the research work we're doing, sometimes it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. Sometimes we don't find what we were expecting to find. But it's very gratifying because we're helping produce accurate information that our readers can rely on. Reliable information will help us make good, informed decisions.
But we're not talking about the National Geographic magazine here, are we? We're talking about Watchtower. We're talking about the Watchtower and Awake magazine. The Watchtower having the tagline, "Announcing Jehovah's Kingdom." Well, what research has been done into Jehovah? What research has been done into Jehovah's Kingdom? Where have we verified the nature of this kingdom and who gets to decide what this kingdom is and from where they receive their divine mandate? We are still talking about essentially a religious organization, a religious magazine. They're trying to kind of sell this idea that they're this they follow journalistic practices and that they are scrupulous when it comes to fact-checking, but they are basically expecting the audience to forget about the fact that they are first and foremost a religion, which is why if the religion teaches something and experts and scholars say something different, well, guess who wins?
Anyone who reads our journal, who sees our videos, can be confident, well, this was thoroughly researched. These are facts. This is the truth.
So when you consider the printed publications of Jehovah's Witnesses or peruse the jw.org website, you can be confident that the material is carefully researched and accurate. Why? Because Jehovah's Witnesses are a people who love and respect the truth.
That has not been my experience, I'm afraid. Individual Jehovah's Witnesses do, I think, at least at some level, value truth. Or the majority at least don't like the idea of being lied to, don't like the idea of being taken advantage of. It's just that many of them haven't yet been able, for various reasons, to put two and two together and realize that they are being taken advantage of and they are being lied to. But the religion itself of Jehovah's Witnesses does not value truth. It is not interested in what is objectively true. It's interested in essentially dogma, regardless of what Tony Morris said in his morning worship speech. It's all about dogma. It's all about this is what we teach. If you want to survive Armageddon, this is what you need to believe. And if anyone says anything different, even if they've devoted their lives to studying this one little detail of when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians or whether life evolved, regardless of what the experts say and people who really know their stuff, if we tell you this, then you have to listen to it because we get to decide what's true and what isn't true. And I found it interesting that they showed this tract, leaflet, call it what you will. Would you like to know the truth? This was actually one of the few pieces of literature that's still fairly widely used that I can actually remember using myself. I can remember giving this to people as a Jehovah's Witness because it was actually published in 2008, which was, one of my final years as a Jehovah's Witness, really. And I think this perfectly illustrates the difference between a theological claim and something that is objectively true. And this was actually, I don't know whether you saw my conversation with David at Disneyland in one of my previous videos. I was basically trying to pin him down on, well, first of all, I wasn't necessarily trying to win any arguments. I just wanted to hear him express his ideas and listen to my perspective so that we could at least understand where our minds were. And I was trying to get across to him that you have theological claims and then you have claims that can be objectively verified. And if it's a theological claim, you're dealing with something that any religion can say. And where if someone from another religion had a competing theological claim, well, they're both just as dubious. And to give you an example of a theological claim, just look at, in this leaflet, there's the section, is there any hope for the dead? It says, what the Bible teaches, most people who have died will be resurrected. Jesus promised that those in the memorial tombs will come out. In harmony with God's original purpose, those resurrected as humans will have the opportunity to live on a paradise earth. This promised future includes perfect health and everlasting life for obedient humans. These are theological claims. Nothing that's said there in the context of what we've just been listening to from David Splane and Jim Mantz and various people working at Watchtower. Nothing there can be objectively verified at all. How do you verify that a global paradise, a paradise earth, is actually a biblical teaching? And if you're a Jehovah's Witness, I'd urge you to research this. Research how many times the Bible talks about a paradise and what those instances of paradise are referring to. It's a worthy field of research, because what you'll find is that it's a theological claim that's unique to Jehovah's Witnesses. It isn't in the Bible. The New Testament describes, if you want to be a Christian, the New Testament describes people going to heaven. It doesn't describe a paradise earth that's inhabited only by a people who follow a bunch of guys in New York. Sorry to break the news to you. That is a theological claim. It cannot be described as a true claim.
As Psalm 31:5 expresses, we worship Jehovah, the God of truth. So it would only make sense that we try to imitate him to the best of our ability by being truthful in all the materials that we publish. He no doubt finds this very pleasing, especially since throughout history, many have tried to twist his teachings.
So, mercifully, we have reached the end of Watchtower's attempt at convincing us that it's obsessed with truth, that it only writes things that are true, and it will bend over backwards to make sure that its writings are accurate. And if you are a Jehovah's Witness watching this, first of all, well done for having the bravery to entertain me on your computer screen or however you're watching this video. But secondly, I really would recommend that you look at a JW Facts article, jwfacts.com, and there's a fantastic article called Misquotes, Deception and Lies. And I'm actually going to put a link in the description below. You may remember earlier in my rebuttal, I showed you a table of misquotes from the Creation book. Well, that's from this page. And the Creation book is just one of many publications that Paul has laboriously and studiously compiled in this article, where Watchtower just gets caught red-handed, twisting the truth and misquoting from people and deceiving people and lying to its readers. Again, the article is Misquotes, Deception and Lies, and if you're interested in knowing the extent to which Watchtower is dishonest when it comes to its writing, I can't recommend this particular resource highly enough. You will be gobsmacked at the extent to which Jehovah's Witnesses have been lied to over the decades by successive generations of Watchtower writers. And I have no confidence at all that things have improved recently, despite what Watchtower is saying in this episode, because if you remember, David Splane was saying, oh, well, there's things that we've written in the past that we wouldn't write now. but we saw the exact same practice being used in the January 2015 Awake article where they misquoted a scientist. So basically it's still going on today. It's all there. If you have the time and inclination to look into it, I would highly recommend looking at this page on JW Facts.
It wasn't my worst day at school, but pretty close. It all started first thing this morning. Everyone was signing a birthday card for one of our classmates, Lucas. He just got home from being at the hospital for cancer treatments. No thanks, I'm a Jehovah's Witness and I don't celebrate birthdays.
What? What? That's true.
My teacher said that Lucas may not come back to school for a long time. I felt so bad he was sick.
Aiden, can you think about it?
So this really touches a few nerves with me, because, and I'm sure it's going to be the same for many of you watching this who were raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. This is quite a disturbing reenactment of what it's like to be raised as a witness and a situation that you will encounter at some point as a child of, I'm not going to say a Jehovah's Witness child because there's no such thing, but a child of Jehovah's Witnesses at school. Inevitably, you're going to come up against situations where the class is involved in doing something that Watchtower disapproves of, and you have to stand out as different. You have to, put your foot down and do what any school child is mortified about doing, which is basically make a big song and dance and say, hey everyone, I'm different and I'm going to be difficult and I'm going to throw a spanner in the works for everyone. And I can remember this exact same situation. I wrote about it in my book where I was required to colour in a Christmas poster for the school. And as punishment for refusing to do it, my teacher made me stand outside in the cold as where everyone could see me as punishment. It's also quite disturbing, the kind of, and I've noticed Watchtower doing this a lot in its videos, this over-dramatized kind of, I don't know, the way the music's used and the way everything's made very, very tense and very kind of traumatic almost. And bear in mind, children are supposed to be watching this, especially the part where the kid's having something injected into his arm. Not really appropriate, I would argue, for witness children, and almost designed to scare them to death and, drive home the importance of the message of the video. And as we're going to see, it's not over by any stretch, because Aiden's going to return home with the birthday card and be guilt-tripped by his father into maintaining his stand, maintaining his decision not to sign it.
The thing is, I did want to sign the card. Lucas was one of the nicest people in my class. Maybe I can just sign it. I mean, it's not like I'm going to a birthday party.
Hey, little man. How you doing? Yeah? Mom said you had a rough day today.
When Dad came in, I told him everything that happened. I know from the Bible that it's wrong to celebrate birthdays, but is signing the card really a big deal? Dad said my question was a good one. Then he showed me a scripture.
Get your Bible for me? Let's look at Ephesians 5.
Ephesians 5:10. Keep on making sure of what is acceptable to the Lord. He said we all have to keep making sure of what's acceptable to Jehovah, because Satan is a master at tricking us. Then he used the example of Aaron. the Israelites asked Aaron to make them a god. So Aaron made a golden calf, thinking that it could represent Jehovah. He told the people, "There's a festival to Jehovah tomorrow." But true worship was being mixed with false worship. And Jehovah was not happy. And many were punished. That example helped me a lot. I know birthdays are wrong because the Bible teaches that they are not approved by Jehovah.
Nonsense. That's just simply not true. And let's just remind ourselves, this is in a JW Broadcasting episode that's talking all about being accurate and being fastidious when it comes to truth. And here we have, in this same JW Broadcasting episode, a statement of fact that is just simply not true. You will not find a verse in the Bible that says that it's wrong to celebrate birthdays. You just won't. Try looking for it. It's not there. The common reason that's given by Jehovah's Witnesses is that, oh, well, because the Bible has bad things to say about what happens during birthday celebrations, therefore birthdays are bad. Well, that's atrocious logic. Many of us have pet dogs. I have a pet dog called Bessie. You know, by all means, read up what it says about dogs in the Bible. Look at all the references to dogs. You will very quickly reach a very negative overall impression about dogs if you base your perspective about that animal on what's written in the Bible. It doesn't stop people from having dogs as pets, and yet a completely different standard applies when it comes to birthdays. And again, bottom line, Watchtower has no right saying that birthdays are denounced in the Bible when they're not. It's just not true, especially in this of all episodes. But I just must also comment on this whole thing of the golden calf. You saw the part where Aidan is recounting the way Aaron made a golden calf for the Israelites while Moses was off receiving the Ten Commandments. And he says they were punished. Lots of people were punished. That's kind of a euphemism, because what really happened, or I say really happened, what's recorded as happening is that 3,000 Israelites are massacred for participating in this supposed act of worship of a golden calf. So 3,000 people die. And that is the story that Jehovah's Witness parents are being asked to read to children who have questions about whether it's right or wrong to celebrate birthdays. Oh, Jimmy, okay, well, I'm glad you've asked that question about whether birthdays are right or wrong. Why don't we just sit down and I'm going to read you this passage about where 3,000 people were hacked down in cold blood for doing something that was morally dubious. Now, do you want to be slaughtered in this way, Jimmy, if you do something that displeases God? No, I didn't think so either, so maybe you shouldn't do it. That's essentially Watchtower's idea of good parenting, apparently.
But we don't want to be confused like Aaron and try to mix true and false worship.
All right, let's go talk to Mom.
We want to make Jehovah happy. So Dad said it's always good to ask, how would Jehovah feel if I do this? I still didn't sign the card, but I'm going to do something else for Lucas. Can I go see Lucas?
Yeah, go ahead, buddy. He's right over there.
been feeling? A little better. And then I realized something. Instead of celebrating one day, I could share with Lucas our hope of living forever on a beautiful paradise earth. No sickness ever again. They'll houses.
I enjoyed seeing how we can show love and concern for others, even if we do not share their beliefs.
Well, Jim, I'm afraid I didn't enjoy that. I was appalled by it. We started off bad, and during the course of that dramatisation, things just get worse and worse and worse. We start off with a lad in a classroom who is tormented by the beliefs that have been pummeled into his brain by his parents, so that he can't do something as simple as put a squiggle on a card. And then we progress to him being guilt-tripped by his father with stories about people being massacred because someone built a golden calf. And we wind up, in conclusion, with the boy with Aidan calling on Lucas's home, and without asking the permission of Lucas's parents, going into his bedroom and pushing in this kid's face materials published by Watchtower, the gist of which tell people or tell children that they will be massacred at Armageddon if they don't align their beliefs with those of the governing body. That's the video that we've just seen. Apparently it's appropriate for children to go into the bedrooms of other children without asking the permission of that child's parent. I would be horrified if someone did that to Jessica. If Jessica was poorly, I mean, obviously she's not old enough to go to school yet, but let's say Jessica was of school age and we live in a Catholic country, and let's say one of her school friends came round. If I walked into the bedroom and saw them there together, and there was Jessica's school friend by the bedside showing her Catholic propaganda, oh, look at this stuff about the Pope, what the Pope's been doing, I would not be a happy person. That is completely inappropriate to be doing that. But in this twisted reality that the governing body exists in, and not just the governing body, but governing body helpers like Jim, this is appropriate, apparently. You can just go in, and, just call around with your kid will run off, get him to take with him some Watchtower propaganda, and, just while the parents aren't looking, while the parents' backs are turned, just whip out this book, which incidentally has a very graphic image of Armageddon in it, as I'm sure many of you know who follow my videos. Just scare the pants off this kid with a reminder of what will happen to them if they don't align their beliefs with Dave, Tony, Jeff, Sam, whatever their names are. Honestly, this was one of the most sickening parts of what was generally a very sickening episode of JW Broadcasting.
We wed in 1971 in Paris, France.
We were baptized in 1974.
1974. That's interesting. That would have been only a year before 1975. I wonder what Watchtower was predicting would happen in that year. So seriously, here we have two people from Portugal, and the essence of this personal testimony is that they ended up raising their children as Jehovah's Witnesses, and didn't they do a fantastic job, because their children today are in various fields of service for Watchtower, and these parents are role models for other parents who might be watching, And it's a reminder that if you persevere with your indoctrination of your children, you will succeed. We've had similar testimonies like this in previous broadcasting episodes, but there are one or two things I wanted to show you.
I realized I really didn't know how to raise children. And then I started applying some things mentioned in the Bible.
Things like do not spare the rod, perhaps?
They wanted to put, for sure, the spiritual interests first in their life. And they wanted not to only tell us to put the kingdom interests first, but they wanted to show us how to do it.
And it's not only that we sit down for family study, that's when we talk about Jehovah and spiritual things. I remember walking back home from meetings, and then my parents would help us to look for star constellations. It starts conversation about Jehovah.
In Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says that we must always talk to our children, that it's good to talk about God, and help them to see God as a real person, a person that is linked to everything around us. So now I wanted to teach them very much.
He's using the word teach here. I think I would rather use the word indoctrinate. And as I've argued in video after video, religion is basically all about child indoctrination, because that's how religions survive. You can only persuade people to believe outrageous things, usually, not in all cases, but in many cases you can only get them to believe it if you get them when they're young, because children are programmed to trust what their parents tell them. It's in our interest to believe our parents without question, and that's children do believe their parents without question. And religion kind of hijacks this process, this healthy mechanism of credulity, and uses it to basically get a foot in the door when it comes to the minds of young ones. And there is nothing to be proud of in this. There's no reason for pride when you have a religion that survives due to tricking and lying to children. Nothing to be proud of.
We never felt that we must go to meeting, we must go in service because you have to do it. And we were always motivated to do things.
I'm sure the threat of fiery destruction at Armageddon if you fail to live up to expectations as a Jehovah's Witness was a helpful source of motivation.
Several times he told me, please never give up in your service. Jehovah is your father, and you have to serve him all your life.
Just a quick reminder for those of you who don't remember what was said earlier about worldly sources of information.
Much of what's presented as fact is often colored by emotion and personal opinion.
How ironic that in the very episode that bemoans the way emotion colours the information presented by worldly sources, emotion is used, again, as a means of trying to persuade witnesses to bypass their critical thinking skills.
The Almighty has children that fail to respond, much like any other parent. God does not force anyone. He respects our free will very much. So, we wanted them to build their own future.
Apparently Jehovah doesn't force anyone. It's all purely down to free will. It's your decision. We're going to shun you if you don't make the same decision that we've made, but ultimately it's for you to decide. We're going to give you the space to make these decisions for yourself. There was a video put up recently by my good friend Alex O'Connor, who incidentally will be visiting me soon here in Croatia. We're going to do an event together. And he's just done a video titled Atheist Evangelism, only on Fox News. I'm going to put a link in the description. It's well worth watching this because he makes a very good point, Alex, about how dishonest Christians can be when it comes to this whole issue of salvation and destruction. So with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's slightly different because they don't believe in hell, but they do believe that you will be destroyed at Armageddon if you reject the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. In the case of other Christian denominations, obviously they have the hell teaching, but it's all more or less the same thing, that you have to believe in Jesus, you have to believe in Jesus in the way we're telling you to believe, and then you will get salvation, whether that's in heaven in the case of most Christians or on a paradise earth in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you don't follow what we're telling you to do, there's going to be consequences. You cannot say that that is a choice. You just can't, because that's a threat. If you go up to someone and say, I want you to do this, and if you don't do it, I'm going to shoot you. But don't worry, it's a choice, because you can always choose not to do it, and it just means that I'm going to shoot you. It makes no sense at all. You're not giving them a choice at all when there is a threat involved. And I just find it astonishing to see this same lack of honesty that you see in mainstream Christianity. Watchtower is guilty of exactly the same kind of false reasoning.
I always felt that my children were not my own, but it was Jehovah who kindly put them into our hands. He entrusted them to us so that we could care for them. And then, when we have done our part, let them fly.
This is a really insidious thing that Jehovah's Witness parents are told. This idea that actually your kids don't really belong to you. They're kind of being rented out to you. Really, they belong to Jehovah. And when we say your kids belong to Jehovah, what we mean is that they kind of belong to the faithful slave. We're entrusting your children to you to teach them what we say. We're doing this to you as a favor. You know, you've been blessed with this opportunity to carry out your duty of indoctrinating your children with what we're telling you, because they're on loan. We're loaning you your kids. That is what JW parents are taught. That's how they're taught to think. What an awful, awful thing.
My husband and I are serving as field missionaries in Klaipėda, Lithuania. I know I will be grateful for all eternity that I used my youth to serve Jehovah, and I didn't waste my years of young age doing things for this world.
She'll be grateful that she hasn't wasted her time and she's instead used her years serving Jehovah. I look at this couple. This is incidentally one of the daughters of the couple that we just saw previously. This is one of their success stories, and she's become a special pioneer in Lithuania. And, you know, out here in Croatia, you get to interact with special pioneers a little bit more, I think, as a Jehovah's Witness, because Croatia's, you know, considered a country where the need is great, so to speak. So you see special pioneers more if you're a Jehovah's Witness out here. And it's just not pretty. They don't live a nice life. They have to get by on peanuts. They have no real career prospects. They have to spend ridiculous hours in the preaching work, and that's their life. And imagine doing that for years and years, or even decades, to turn around then and say, oh, well, at least it wasn't a waste. Listen, it's either true or it's not true. And if you can't prove that it's true, or if the claims that you're making, the theological claims that you're making, and spending all these hours circulating are no more provable or demonstrable than the claims of other religions, I hate to break the news to you, but you are absolutely wasting your life.
3 years later, I spent a week with a special pioneer who were serving in the countryside. We prayed together every night and read life stories from the Watchtower. I told Jehovah I wanted to be just like her. Although my relatives were unhappy with my decision, with Jehovah's help, I decided to become a pioneer.
I followed her example and I became a pioneer too.
I was working 6 days a week to support my family, so I prayed to Jehovah for the opportunity to become a pioneer. After my boss reduced my work to 5 days a week, I started pioneering.
Pioneer service gives you the opportunity to serve Jehovah more fully.
Pioneer service gives you the opportunity to serve the governing body more fully, I think you will find. And what's interesting about this video, I think these are 3 girls from Mongolia, and the whole point is that they've each had an influence on each other to do various things, whether it's get to the meetings or study the Bible with witnesses, or in this case become pioneers. They've each influenced each other. And you know, where does that stand with the whole thing with peer pressure? When you're reading Watchtower literature, it's continually banging on about peer pressure and not doing things just because your peers are doing it. But when it comes to Watchtower, oh well, the rules are slightly different there. Peer pressure is okay so long as it's pressure to do what we want you to do, such as in this case, pioneering.
Now I can serve Jehovah more fully.
My appreciation for Jehovah has deepened.
Our mother, who opposed us, became a pioneer too.
Full-time service is really awesome.
I've got nothing. Yeah, full-time service is really awesome. If you're a young person, go for it. You won't have any regrets when you're older if you spend years or decades serving an organization that has no proof that it can offer anyone that it has any special relationship with God. No regrets at all. Go for it. What's the worst that could happen?
The world tries to tempt us with deceptive lies about what is important in life. But our own careful research of the Bible can protect and guide us when we are planning a wedding.
I never realized how much goes into a wedding. And everyone had their own ideas of what we needed, even Dad. We had to think about who we would invite, pick out flowers, decorations, a suit for Nick, and of course, a dress. This was going to be so much fun. Or so I thought. I soon found out there's a whole wedding-related industry out there.
A wedding-related industry? Surely not.
They were trying to be helpful, but at the same time, this is how they make money. It seemed like nothing they had was modest, and the cost for something I would only wear one day, I couldn't afford that. Everyone was so happy for me, but inside, I was really starting to feel the pressure.
Yes, apparently that wedding dress wasn't modest. And I just want you to remember visually what that wedding dress looked like, because later we're going to see a wedding dress that is modest. And I'll let you guess at this point now, just take a wild guess what it was about that wedding dress that made it immodest.
We had a meeting with Brother Gray and Brother Sharp the next day to discuss using the Kingdom Hall for our wedding. They gave us some helpful reminders, and I'm so glad they did. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31 says, "Whether you're eating or drinking or doing anything else, do all things for God's glory." Brother Sharp helped us to see that a wedding is a spiritual occasion, and we need to keep Jehovah's standards in mind when we plan for what we will or won't choose to include.
I've included this part because it actually gives a very interesting glimpse into how controlled and micromanaged Jehovah's Witness lives are. So in this case, it's dealing with a young couple who want to get married, and just the simple act of using the Kingdom Hall as the venue, as the place where they exchange their vows. Well, we need to meet with the elders, and we need to go through the arrangements in detail and make sure that everything is meets with the elders' approval. Now, as it happens, I didn't need to go through all this when Deanna and I got married, because we got married in Croatia, and the rules there are that you can't get married in a kingdom hall. It has to be in the registry office. So we had our official ceremony in a registry office, and then we had the talk and everything at the hotel on the balcony, as it happens. So it's actually a really nice wedding. And obviously we had to choose a speaker and all of that kind of thing, but we never had to go through this rigmarole of, consulting with the elders to find out whether it would be possible to use the Kingdom Hall. But that is what you need to do in most instances. And what's interesting is that I wouldn't call it a double standard, but it is interesting when you look at the way kingdom halls are used when it comes to international conventions and entertaining delegates. I featured in one of my more recent videos, they even had line dancing on a kingdom hall platform to entertain convention delegates. But when it comes to weddings, they have very strict protocols as to things like music and the way the ceremony is to take place. And I don't know, I just can't help but think it's odd that all of the rules fly out of the window when it comes to an international convention, because here we have an opportunity for Watchtower to make lots of money by bringing in delegates. But when it's a wedding, oh, well, hang on a minute, let's sit down, let's get our Bibles out. We need to go through this. But I also just want to show you a clip, and this is not from the JW Broadcasting episode. This is from the 2018 School for Elders. This is actually a leaked video, and I need to thank Avoid JW for leaking this video, or for whoever leaked it to him. But this is a video that was, a link was sent to me, and I've kind of skimmed through all of the videos, but this was one of them that stood out, and it's to do with planning a wedding. And I just want to show it to you in the context of what we're discussing.
Brother Harris, do you have a moment?
Sure, Faye. How can we help you?
Well, you probably heard by now. David and I got engaged this past weekend.
We heard. Congratulations. We're so happy for both of you.
Thanks so much. And since this is where I grew up, it would mean a lot to us if we could get married in this Kingdom Hall. So we were hoping, since you're the coordinator of the body of elders, you'd be able to let us know today if we can use the hall. Then David and I can start working on our wedding invitations. David asked me to give you this letter, making our official request.
Okay. Yes, this is a good letter. This has all the information that we need. I'm going to check with the other elders, and we're going to discuss it. Then we'll get right back to you.
Oh, you mean you can't tell me right now? I thought since you're the coordinator, you'd have the authority to,
I understand, but there is a theocratic arrangement that we all have to follow, even the elders. And the arrangement is for the entire service committee to discuss this, consider the matter thoroughly, and before any approval is given. So I don't have the authority to make a decision on my own.
Of course, that makes sense. I understand.
But don't worry, Faye. We're going to get on this as soon as possible. Then you can move forward with your wedding plans.
Thank you so much, Brother Harris. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So I've obviously included this because it's related to this part of the broadcast about planning a wedding. But it just seems like a good opportunity to show this clip. And what's interesting about this clip is there's just a tinge of misogyny here, because it has to be the girl who's being impetuous and who is trying to boss the elders around. And if you're an elder watching this as one of the elders attending the school, probably you'll be thinking, oh, typical sisters, trying to tell elders what to do, being opinionated, being pushy and bossy. It can't be the groom. It can't be the groom that's making this request. It can't be the groom who's not following proper protocol. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I just watched that and thought, well, there we have a typical example of witness women being portrayed in a negative light, as being pushy, as being opinionated, as being bossy, as just generally being difficult to deal with.
On the way there, we passed by a photography studio. I couldn't believe how lavish and showy some weddings are. It looked more like an excuse to party, instead of something that's supposed to honor God.
Yes, if your wedding is lavish, or people enjoy themselves too much, or enjoy themselves in a way Watchtower doesn't approve of, it will not honor God.
It reminded me of the book of Galatians. Now the works of the flesh are drunkenness, wild parties, and things like these. We didn't want to do anything like that. We each took the time to prayerfully consider the material the brothers gave us.
We saw that scriptural principles can even help us plan a wedding that's affordable, enjoyable for everyone, and a day that honors Jehovah.
Now, whether you've ever been a Jehovah's Witness or not, if you've been married, or if you know anything about weddings and that kind of thing, you'll know it's an extremely stressful thing to go through. You are planning something that will be a massive event in your life, and there are all these people that you need to involve, and there are all these expectations being placed on you. And what really stands out in this video is the fact that in addition to the normal expectations that are placed on anyone who gets married, for Jehovah's Witnesses, it's even worse. There are even more things to think about. And actually, don't be surprised if you're a young bride and groom, if you actually end up having to sit down with your elders and they pass you these Watchtower and Awake magazine articles and give you homework. Don't be surprised if you actually have to go away and read a whole load of stuff about the extra expectations that are unique to Jehovah's Witnesses that you need to comply with.
It looked like we needed to make some adjustments. We couldn't include everything we originally thought. Some things were just too expensive.
And we wanted to make sure that none of our choices reflected the spirit of the world.
So we decided to start over and make sure we were doing things Jehovah's way. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 says that a Christian should adorn themselves in appropriate or respectable dress, with modesty and soundness of mind. It took some work, but we were able to find something affordable, appropriate, and beautiful.
Well, at least we now know what is considered to be a modest wedding dress. It's been spelled out for us, because if you remember earlier, I asked you to just remember the dress that she had before. And I am no expert on fashion, on wedding dresses. I don't have any expertise in that area. However, the only difference that I could notice, or that was most noticeable, was the fact that the immodest wedding dress didn't have sleeves, and the modest wedding dress did have sleeves. So literally, just by adding a bit of cloth here, suddenly it's biblical. So, well, the Bible would approve of this, because what the Bible demands of brides is that they just add that bit of cloth, and that they don't show this part of their... Honestly, that's what we're dealing with nowadays with Jehovah's Witnesses. And in all seriousness, we can laugh about it, but just imagine that you are not just a Jehovah's Witness watching this, but a young Jehovah's Witness couple who are anticipating getting married in the near future. Suddenly it's, oh, okay, my dress needs to look like that. My dress needs to have sleeves. Even if it's very short sleeves, there needs to be some kind of sleeve there. Otherwise, it's an immodest wedding dress. because Watchtower has just told 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses that unless your wedding dress has sleeves, it's immodest and disrespectful. That is how Pharisaical and rule-based the Jehovah's Witness religion has become.
I was able to find a nice suit. Something I could even wear later.
I'm guessing that means the pants weren't too tight.
And of course, the girls came by to make sure that everything matched.
Of course, because only girls are interested in whether things match or not.
When my dad walked me down the aisle that day, I was so excited.
Juliana was so beautiful. And the ceremony was just perfect.
It was perfect, simple, dignified. Our friends all told us it was one of the nicest weddings they've been to. Everything that day was just what we wanted. It even stayed on budget.
And most importantly, we got our marriage off to a good start with Jehovah's help.
I'm so happy we found each other.
I'm so happy I found you too, love. And I know we'll stay happy if we keep Jehovah first.
The couple's ability to reason on scriptural principles helped them to make the right decisions.
What a cheesy, fake, contrived, controlling piece of propaganda we've just seen. Again, I can only imagine how stressed you're going to be at this point if you happen to be a young Jehovah's Witness contemplating marriage. Oh, guess what? These are all the extra things you now need to think about. This is how obsessive you need to be when it comes to observing the letter of the law if you want to use the Kingdom Hall as your for your ceremony. This is what your wedding dress needs to look like. Everything needs to be perfect. Your guests need to be able to say that this is one of the best weddings they've ever been to. This is, honestly... Now, the next clip I've actually already dealt with. Now, you may remember in one of my recent videos, I did a rebuttal to Gary Bro, who is on the governing body's service committee. He did a morning worship that was actually broadcast in this episode, and it was to do with the 2-witness rule. So for the sake of completeness, I thought we could just take a look at that particular clip again.
Good reasoning ability is an essential quality of a true Christian. But what does it really mean to reason on matters? This morning worship program by Gary Bro will show us.
Now, what is another circumstance that might quickly shaken our faith if we're not on guard? Well, it has to do with the apostates. Now, there's something that the apostates are talking about and trying to put forward. The media has picked it up. Others have also picked it up. And that is our scriptural position of having 2 witnesses a requirement for judicial action if there's no confession. Now, if you open your Bibles to Deuteronomy 19:15, our good reasoning is pretty solid on this. In Deuteronomy 19:15, the scripture is very, very clear. It says, no single witness may convict another for any error or any sin that he may commit. On the testimony of 2 witnesses or on the testimony of 3 witnesses, the matter should be established. It's very clear, isn't it? You cannot establish a judicial committee based on 1 witness. But now listen, here's what they say. Well, now look, the Old Testament also says that adulteresses should be stoned. Now, since you're not doing that, why do you stick to this 2-witness rule? And see, if you're not careful, that can do some tricks on your mind because you have to think it through. Well, how might we do that? Well, we'll go to Matthew chapter 18 and verse 16 because obviously Christ Jesus established the Christian arrangement. And notice what he said, Matthew 18 and verse 16. He says, but if he does not listen, take along with you one or two more, so that on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter may be established. So Christ Jesus establishes the fact that there has to be 2 witnesses. Now, it doesn't mean that if there's only one witness, that there's no consequences. There might be, depending upon the situation. But the scriptures are very clear. Before a judicial committee can be convened, there has to be a confession or 2 witnesses. So we will never change our scriptural position on that subject.
So if you follow my channel, you'll know that I've already done a rebuttal to this particular statement by Gary Bro. I'm not going to duplicate my efforts and repeat myself, but yeah, it's just worth kind of raising this again and noting how awful Gary's reasoning is on this. You simply do not apply Matthew 18, where it talks about if your brother commits a sin, go lay bare his fault between you and him alone. You simply do not apply that to a case where a child, not a brother, but a child is molested. The child cannot in any sense be considered to be a brother, and in any case, we're talking about a crime. If you really genuinely take child abuse seriously as a crime, then it's irrelevant. Matthew 18 is irrelevant. You're going to report it immediately to the authorities. And one thing I'm not sure I mentioned in my rebuttal is that it's interesting that in all of this statement that Gary Bro made, he doesn't actually mention child abuse once. That's something I don't think I mentioned in my rebuttal. And that's fascinating, because if you're going to single out apostates and call them out on something and say, well, you're wrong on this, you'd think he would actually introduce a little bit of context and say, well, they're saying it because of, child abuse and the fact that we even apply this requirement for 2 witnesses in cases of child molestation, and that's why we don't give elders the freedom to report child abuse to the police, or we don't tell Jehovah's Witness parents to report child abuse to the police. We only advise elders that they're not to tell parents not to go to the police. You would think that Gary would be a little bit more transparent and honest in mentioning exactly what this relates to, but bottom line, it's abominable of Watchtower to cling to this ridiculous requirement and not see the writing on the wall. I mean, they're dealing with case after case, lawsuit after lawsuit. They've been hammered by the Australian Royal Commission, and you would think at some point the penny will drop and they'll say, actually, we really don't need to cling on to this. This doesn't have to be our sacred cow. There really is room for maneuver, especially when it comes to protecting children. We need to protect the most vulnerable in our congregations. As I said in my rebuttal, in one of my rebuttals, it's a minimum requirement of a religion to make sure the kids are protected, and Watchtower can't even do that.
Even when difficult circumstances arise, such as judicial matters, we cling to our accurate understanding of the Bible. Yes, Jehovah is the God of truth.
Is he now? Well, that's interesting. Because as I've already mentioned, it doesn't take a lot of digging to find clear examples in Watchtower publications of where the God of truth or his organization hasn't been entirely truthful in what it's told witnesses. And these comments by Jim are actually following up from Gary's remarks about the 2-witness rule. But I find it interesting that in a legal context, which is how he's applying this in a judicial legal context, he's saying, oh, well, the organization's always truthful. We would never dream of telling a lie because we worship the God of truth. Well, with that in mind, I'm going to show you a recording, some video footage that was taken at the Supreme Court in Canada. A few of you may already have seen this, but for those of you who haven't, I think you're going to find this interesting. This is one of Watchtower's lawyers at the Supreme Court in Canada describing the disfellowshipping arrangement.
As the meeting progressed with Mr. Wall, the elders came to the decision that Mr. Wall was not sufficiently repentant for his disgraceful conduct, and the congregation elders took the decision to disfellowship him. That word is used by Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses don't use the word shun or shunning. They refer to it as disfellowship, disfellowshipping, disfellowshipped, because that really gives the sense of what's taking place within this particular religious community. Disfellowship literally means no further spiritual fellowship with the individual. And as I point out, sorry, Chief Justice. As I point out at paragraph 22 of my factum, the nature of the relationship then of a disfellowship person is not completely shunned. The disfellowship person is able to come into the congregation, to the congregation meetings. They're able to attend in the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. They're able to sit wherever they like. They can sing the spiritual songs with the congregation. As far as their family members are concerned, normal family relations continue with the exception of spiritual fellowship. And the door is not closed to Mr. Wall either. The person who is disfellowshipped can, after a period of time, ask to be reinstated in the congregation, because that's the purpose of the discipline.
So this is a Watchtower lawyer, a legal representative of Jehovah's organization, the organization of the God of Truth, who is saying before Canada's Supreme Court that someone who is disfellowshipped can continue to have normal family relations, normal family contact, however he worded it. That's just an utter lie. He's lied. He's actually violated the rules of the court. He's committed perjury, because that's just simply not true. I can testify to that as someone who is being denied normal family contact by my father simply because I've disassociated. And I've made it clear in my own case that I have no special need to, talk about my views or my opinions when it comes to religion. I'd just be happy to have my dad in my life again so that my daughter can have a grandfather. But that's not allowed. It's not allowed according to witness literature, according to Watchtower article after Watchtower article, according to convention talk after convention talk, according to video after video. Parents are repeatedly told to not have any contact. One Watchtower even says not even by email. So I just wanted to show that clip. The actual court case, I'm not going to go into details, but I will drop a link in the description for those of you who want to look into the court case in more detail. But I just find that particular clip fascinating because it shows very clearly the fact that Watchtower lawyers will lie in court if it means achieving their objective. They have a theocratic warfare stroke ends justify means mentality when it comes to defending the organization, and they are quite willing to lie, to tell a barefaced lie if it means pushing their agenda.
Our music video for this month is entitled Inspired by Your Wonders.
Looking past what we can see with our eyes, we will come to know more about the one who gave us life.
Yes, it's time for the monthly Cringe Fest, which is the music video. That's actually a saying that you hear quite frequently as a Jehovah's Witness. Look past what the eyes can see and look with eyes of faith. It's not just about what you can see with the physical eye. You need to look with eyes of faith as well, And I actually think that's a dangerous way of looking at things, because it can, especially when you place more importance on what you see with your eyes of faith, it can cause you to miss what's glaringly obvious, what's staring you in the face. And in the context of this episode, we've already seen David Splane more or less admitting that when scholars give evidence for something having happened in a certain year, as the example was given with Egypt, well, we can ignore them because we're seeing with eyes of faith. We're believing that we know better. We're believing that the Bible must be taken literally. We're believing that if you count back along all the genealogies, going all the way back to the patriarchs, going all the way back to Abraham, and then all the way back to Noah, and if we count all of those years, we'll get to the year 2370 for the flood. And that's a concrete date that cannot be questioned by anyone, no matter how well versed they are, no matter how well educated they are, no matter how many years they've dedicated to their field of study. With eyes of faith, we know better. It's a very dangerous way of reaching your conclusions.
Well, David, it's hard to imagine that we've already come to the end of another monthly broadcast.
And Jim, I want to thank you very much for all your help with this program. I really, really appreciate it.
Thus ends the November 2017 JW Broadcasting episode. That's more or less it. I'm sure you'll agree that was a whopper of a JW Broadcasting episode when it comes to the sheer volume of stuff to go through. I mean, some of these episodes I can fire off quite quickly because, quite frankly, there's just not much to talk about. Here, it was like an onslaught of nonsense from beginning to end. And I really had to pay some attention, I hope you don't mind, with some of the stuff that David Splane was coming out with early on. I continue to be flabbergasted that the man can take any pride whatsoever in the quote-unquote credibility of the publications when there are documented examples that you can find very easily where Watchtower has misquoted or it has outright lied in its publications down through the decades. And as I've mentioned before, this even goes up to as recently as the January 2015 Awake magazine, where a scientist was misquoted on evolution. So I hope you found these thoughts interesting. Now, we need to talk, don't we, about the December broadcasting episode. And I'm just going to show you a brief clip which relates to the way the governing body are going to be doing the broadcasting episodes from now on.
The governing body has decided that Gilead graduations and the spiritual portion of the annual meeting programs will be featured as monthly JW broadcasting programs each year.
So essentially what Mark Numer was telling us at the beginning of the December broadcast was that the goalposts have now shifted. Apparently, or this is what it looks like to me. It looks to me as though the governing body or Watchtower or whatever, they simply cannot keep up with pushing out propaganda at this level every single month. It's just beyond them now. So they're basically watering down their schedule, in my opinion, by treating the Gilead graduation and the spiritual section of the annual meeting as their own JW broadcasting episodes. Previously, these would be released anyway on the JW Broadcasting website, and if you were interested in the Gilead graduation or if you were interested in the annual meeting, well, they were there in the drop-down. But the broadcasting episode was something different entirely that was, a little bit more interesting. Well, here's some segments, here's some dramatizations, here's some music videos. It was like a mix. Obviously intended as propaganda to manipulate people, but just something a little bit interesting that we could get our teeth into. And now, well, we first of all went from the governing body saying, well, we're not going to appear in every single episode. We're just going to appear in every other episode. And now they're saying, actually, you know what? instead of doing 12 monthly broadcasting episodes, we're now going to cut it down to 10, and the missing 2 will be the annual meeting and the Gilead graduation. I just find that fascinating, because you can understand downsizing and scaling back on things when it's printing, when it's printed work. But when you have videos, and bear in mind that Watchtower is increasingly boasting about its video making abilities and the resources that it's devoting to making videos, for them to already be like, maybe we need to rethink this. I'm fascinated by that, and I'd love to know what the real reasons are. They give a reason about translation in the in Mark Numer's comments, but I'm not buying that. So anyway, I now need to think about how I'm going to do my rebuttals, and quite frankly, I don't feel motivated to do a JW Broadcasting rebuttal for a Gilead graduation. The annual meeting I want to do for as the Watchtower in Focus series. I want to do what I did this year, which is make a Watchtower in Focus episode at the time of the annual meeting, when the news is fresh and when the news is breaking. But I have no motivation at all to make one of these rebuttals for out of date information. It's just I've got other things to be doing. So what I've decided to do is I will obviously continue doing my JW Broadcasting rebuttals, but the numbering system that I have will be applied only to actual JW Broadcasting episodes of the same as what we've already seen. I'm not going to treat, in other words, the annual meeting episode and the Gilead graduation episode as part of the numbering system. And in a way, I'm actually quite relieved that I have less crap, frankly, to wade through with these rebuttals, because what it means is that I can devote more of my time to smaller videos where I can deal with just one subject and deal with it and move on to something else, move on to other video projects. And it also means that I can go back to the missing numbers. There are 3 or 4 episodes that I had to skip because I was writing my book at the time. It means I can go back and look at those, which will be interesting to revisit those after so much time has passed. So for those of you who follow my JW Broadcasting episodes, that's how I'm going to handle this, I think. I'm going to carry on doing them. But again, the numbering only applies to a genuine episode that has segments and testimonies and all of the usual stuff. So that's it feels like a 2-in-1 now, November and December. But those are my thoughts on the JW Broadcasting episodes. I hope you have found this information interesting. And as always, thank you for watching.